And then it was my turn just to be so stunned I couldn't say a word. And what I thought was, wow, this is their origin. When they lost their national self-esteem, when it's affected each generation in the personal self-esteem, and how much our national and personal self-esteem can be tied in to one another, as well as the conflict is rarely, if ever, what it appears to be on the surface. And then I saw how what we could relate to conflict mediation or resolution or transformation to these countries related to us individually in our own personal lives. And we could not separate the two. So then Moscow asked me to teach a seminar for the Politburo. And then later, when the change came in the Soviet Union, for the Russian Parliament. And then one of the members of the Politburo came to me, he said, why is it you're able to bring these warring countries together, but other governments have failed? Is it because of yoga? Is that interesting? Because of yoga? And I thought, I didn't talk about that because I didn't think we could. And I said, and I thought, yes, it's because of what I've learned through that discipline that I'm able to apply that in these international negotiations. And then when I said, yes, I think it's because of yoga. And then he said, oh, then we must practice yoga. And then one of the members heard Swami Satchidananda chanting Om. And he said, what does that Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti mean? And I said, it means peace with, well, the universal is Om. And then it means peace with yourself. The second one means peace with the fellow men, your comrades, and those who are in your life, and those with whom there's been discord. And the third time it means peace throughout our world. And he touched his heart, and he said, oh, that is so beautiful. We are going to start and end every Politburo meeting with Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So when I began teaching the conflict resolution principles, I realized I had based it on the Yoga Sutras, these ancient texts. And these ancient texts that are over 5,000 years old were based on even more ancient teachings. And in these teachings, it is the deepest psychology of the human mind. It doesn't talk about the emotions. It talks about the emotions as being the byproduct of our thought waves. And when the thoughts come out of alignment and the sense of separation gets involved, and we see the separation, then we have conflict and we have wars in our world. And what happens in our own life will determine what is happening collectively with us. And what is happening collectively usually determines what is happening in our own life. And I realize that, and I've told this before, and some of you may have heard this before, when I came home from a very difficult planning trip in the Soviet Union, and I came into my house, and my husband was there taking care of the baby, and very upset because the roof was leaking. It was Seattle, and the roofs are leaking a lot there. And the washer in the sink was broken, and he was complaining. And I got so angry. I said, I've been out there on the front lines doing this work, and here you are, a house husband, taking care of the baby, and you can't take care of this? I was so angry. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said, why can't you treat me like the Russians? And that's when I got it. I had to do this work, to really be a peacemaker, I had to refine my own inner evolutionary journey to the point where I was seamless, where I would be the same with you or Florin as I would be with Gorbachev. And I would be the same with an ambassador, which we had to meet quite a few of, as I would be with the taxi driver. I had to treat everyone with equal respect, and the hardest thing was those nearest me in my own home. It's much easier to do it with our neighbor than those we live with. And could I, in the Buddhist teachings, which I've been part of too, could I come to see each person without bringing the baggage from the past, but see them as if I were seeing them for the very first time? Without all the images that we collect and accumulate of the past hurts and what they've done to us, or what this happened or that happened. But can we erase that and come as if we're seeing them anew, and seeing them not just as a reflection of ourselves, but as ourselves? So in the Yoga Sutras, the second sutra, which is the most powerful, it says everything. Yoga is chittavritti nirodha. Yoga is to still the fluctuations that arise in the field of the mind. And then it goes on to talk about the 4 parts of mind: the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, the ego, and the overmind, the buddhi. That which can see is like it can see from the mountaintops, where the ego is like the general who sends his lieutenant into the valleys as the general stands on the mountaintops and can see the approaching armies. And so I realized that here, that the idea is to stay in the overmind, which sees the differences and can discriminate, but it does not compare the differences. I like him, I don't like her. I like this, I don't like that. He's too tall, she's too short. All of these things that we get into that creates more and more division and separation. And then when he talks about Patanjali, the father of yoga, who compiled the existing teachings in these brief, succinct 195 aphorisms, and he says that there are five mind waves, some painful and some non-painful. And he gives the first one, which is perception. And I realized that conflict, all conflict, is about perception. It's not about truth. Nothing's about truth. It's about our perception of what we may think may be that truth. And then he says, this perception, as it gets further and further away from the source, becomes misconception, erroneous perception. And he gives 3 places this can happen. One is we have our direct experience of something. Like I went to the Soviet Union. I discovered there were no enemies. They were not our enemies. And they were as frightened of us as we were of them. Then, the second would be the indirect experience. So I came back and told my story. And other people who resonated with it. Some wanted to just know that they weren't the enemies, and others wanted to go direct and see for themselves and meet the enemy. And then, the further we get away from direct or even the indirect experience of another, which can also cause more stereotypes. If someone has a bad experiences and shares with you, then you may take that on as your own experience of that person or that thing. And then as it becomes inference, where our media takes it on, gets further and further and further away from the source. And so whenever we want to know something, I say, let's go direct. Let's go to the source. So if someone has had an experience with a friend, and they tell us, like Diana, saying, I'm such a wonderful person, and then I think, oh my gosh, I have to live up to that. And there's an expectation. And then someone may come to me expecting me to be a wonderful person, and they may find me something else. And so, therefore, but if you've never met me, then you might believe what Diana said. that I'm a wonderful person. Have you ever been afraid to let somebody get too close to you for fear they'll find out how you really are? Have you ever had that happen? Have you had that happen? Well, there's another one that you can have happen, and that is if somebody has something critical to say about us, then what we can do is say, oh, if they only knew me better, they wouldn't feel that way. That's the other part. If they only knew me better. And so I found that in the conflict resolution roundtables we did with warring factions, the key was to bring the warring factions to the table, which wasn't always so easy, but we did, and then have them, ask them questions where they could talk about what happened for them so that the other could see them as themselves. And when we can quiet the waves of the mind, which is the essence of all these spiritual teachings, then the mind becomes like a still lake, and we look into the center, and there, as the third sutra says, Tadadrashtuhu Swarupe Avastanam, and then the seer and the seen become one. But I always say, like yoga, which means oneness or unity, people will say, well, it's bringing together, harnessing the individual to the universal. And I'll say to the yoga teachers, which I work with mainly, I'll say, are you really, can you become one with the universal? Can we join anything that has never been separated? So when the mind becomes still, we see our own reflection and realize the oneness that already is, the oneness with that universal presence. It's very powerful. And if we can hold that idea of oneness, we transmute all the boundaries of separation that we've held in the past. The fear cannot coexist with that sense of oneness. And as I say, the term love, we don't have to love. And the word love is not usually used in yoga. The Dalai Lama says compassion plus detachment equals love. It's not holding on to something we want to make happen, but he said it equals love. So when we brought the Armenians, the Azerbaijanis together at the meditation, the peace table, we asked them the question, how did Gorbachev's perestroika and glasnost affect you and the family? And as the Armenian man started talking, he described how the Red Army came in and they brutalized them. And they made them, they threw his passport in the gutter in front of his small son and made him get down and pick it up with his teeth in the gutter where the blood was running from the violence that was occurring. And as his son watched this, his son wanted to fight back and watched his father succumb to this indignity because the father was trying to protect the son. And what it did, as this man was speaking, he said, our culture is based on the family unity. But he said, this is eroding the way our children see us. They do not have the respect for us because we are not fighting back.